What if the men who built this country were actually smarter than every single politician alive today? Not just a little smarter, dramatically, embarrassingly smarter. And what if the proof has been sitting in plain text for over 200 years, waiting for someone to actually read it? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to see modern American politics in a way you cannot unsee. Let us go back to 1787. The Constitutional Convention has just wrapped up in Philadelphia. The delegates have produced a document that is either going to unite 13 fractured states or collapse into chaos. And the debate that followed was one of the most intellectually violent arguments in human history. On one side, you had Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, collectively writing under the pseudonym Publius, producing what would become the Federalist Papers. On the other side, you had brilliant minds like George Mason, Patrick Henry, and the anonymous writers known as Brutus and the Federal Farmer, producing what we call the Anti-Federalist Papers. These two opposing camps were not enemies. They were philosophers, and they were afraid of the same thing. They just disagreed on how to stop it. Federalist number 1, published October 27, 1787, written by Alexander Hamilton, sets the entire tone. Hamilton opens with something that should stop you cold. He essentially says that the American people are being called upon to decide whether good government can actually come from reflection and choice, or whether human beings are forever condemned to stumble into their governments by accident and force. Read that again. He was asking whether rational human beings could consciously design a free and stable society. That question was radical then. It is almost completely absent from political conversation today. Hamilton also does something else in Federalist number 1 that people miss. He warns the reader about bias. He literally says that men who are ambitious or corrupt will wrap themselves in the language of the people to oppose good government. He was describing a psychological trap. He was telling you in 1787 that populist rhetoric can be weaponized by people who have zero interest in actual governance. If that does not describe your last 10 years of watching the news, I do not know what does. Now here is where it gets philosophically deep. The Anti-Federalists were not wrong. They were not the losers of the debate. They were the necessary counterweight, and their thinking was soaked in Stoic philosophy, the same framework Marcus Aurelius used to run the Roman Empire. The Anti-Federalists, particularly Brutus, writing in October 1787, argued that a large, centralized republic was inherently dangerous because power naturally consolidates, naturally corrupts, and naturally drifts away from the people. Brutus pointed to ancient Greece and Rome and said, "Look at what happens when republics grow too large for citizens to meaningfully participate." They had studied history the way modern politicians simply do not. This Stoic mindset meant something specific. It meant that the Anti-Federalists approached government the way a Stoic approaches life, by assuming that human nature is flawed, that temptation is constant, and that systems must be designed to constrain weakness rather than hope for virtue. George Mason, who refused to sign the Constitution without a Bill of Rights, was operating from this exact framework. He was not being difficult. He was being rigorous. The Stoic does not trust good intentions. The Stoic builds walls against bad ones. So what did we actually get from this debate? We got the Bill of Rights in 1791, the Anti-Federalist victory. We got a federal system with separation of powers, a partial Federalist victory. And we got a document that both sides could live with because both sides were genuinely trying to solve the same problem: how do you keep free people free? Now compare that to today. The average length of a major piece of legislation passed by Congress runs into thousands of pages. The Federalist Papers, all 85 of them combined, fit into a single readable book. The men debating the future of the entire nation were producing clear, logical, historically informed arguments in newspaper columns. Today, we cannot get a committee to produce a coherent paragraph. The intellectual gap is staggering, and it should make you angry. But here is the deeper psychological issue Hamilton was already warning about. When people are afraid, when they feel economically squeezed or culturally threatened, they stop demanding competence from their leaders and start demanding comfort. They want someone to validate their anger more than they want someone to actually solve anything. Hamilton saw this coming. Brutus saw this coming. They just disagreed on which structural failure would cause it first. So how do we get back? Here is the practical answer rooted in exactly what these founders were doing. First, we have to demand philosophical literacy from public figures. Not just policy positions, but the ability to reason under pressure. Second, we need to resurrect the culture of principled opposition. The Anti-Federalists made the Constitution better by being brilliant critics. We need critics who study history, not critics who study polling numbers. Third, every citizen needs to understand that the tension between centralized power and local control is not a partisan debate. It is a permanent structural reality that requires permanent vigilance. The founders knew this. We forgot it. The most stoic thing about both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists is that neither side trusted itself completely. Hamilton built in checks because he knew men like Hamilton would eventually have too much power. Mason demanded a Bill of Rights because he knew men like Mason could be wrong about what rights mattered. That mutual distrust of one's own faction is the rarest and most necessary ingredient in good governance, and it is almost completely extinct today. Here is your takeaway. The founders were not mythological figures. They were scared, flawed, brilliant people who read obsessively, argued ferociously, and forced each other to be smarter. That process is available to us right now. The books exist. The arguments exist. The only thing missing is the will to engage with them seriously. Start with Federalist number 1. It is 4 pages. Read it this week. Then read Brutus number 1 right after. Let them argue in your head. That argument is the beginning of everything.